The dealer's verdict arrived in 4 words. $200,000. 8 luxury vehicles. The same fault codes. The same warning pattern. 1 devastating repair estimate. Margaret Holloway did not sign it. Instead, she called the one man the dealership had fired 18 months earlier, the man who had once submitted a technical report about that exact failure, only to watch a service director bury it and show him the door. That night, Ryan Cole stood alone inside his small Chicago repair shop, a diagnostic scanner in one hand and a $14 fuse sitting on the workbench. He had lost almost everything because he knew too much. Now he was about to prove exactly how much he knew. And what he discovered that night would change the way Margaret looked at every repair bill for the rest of her life. The morning came cold and grey over Halsted Street in Chicago. It was the kind of November cold that sank into brick, concrete, and steel, then refused to leave until spring. Ryan Cole opened his garage at 6:45, just as he did every day. He unlocked the side door with a key that always stuck on the third turn, flipped on the overhead lights one row at a time, then raised the wall heaters from their overnight setting. He waited through the groaning, metallic protest they made before finally giving in and producing warmth. Cole Auto Repair occupied a narrow service bay squeezed between a Vietnamese grocery store and a dry cleaner, on a block where foot traffic outnumbered cars. It was the sort of storefront most people walked past without ever reading the sign. Inside, however, everything had order. Tools lined the left wall with a precision that seemed almost too careful for such a small space. Every socket set had its rail. Every torque wrench hung exactly where it belonged. Every diagnostic cable was coiled and labeled, never tossed aside. The scan station near the lift was newer than everything else in the building, bought used when a dealership shut down 2 years earlier, then kept alive with software licenses Ryan renewed every January no matter how thin the profit margins were. He had made that a priority early. In a small shop, trust did not come from what a mechanic claimed about himself. It came from what he could point to. The equipment was his argument. Lucas Reed arrived at 7, shrugging out of his coat in the doorway and dropping his bag beside the lift. He was 26, trained through a vocational program, and 2 years into a trade he was still growing into. He was reliable in the particular way some young mechanics are before the industry teaches them how to cut corners. He asked questions when he was unsure. He admitted when he needed help. He did not pretend otherwise. In the small waiting area at the front of the shop, separated from the service bay by a half wall of glass, Ryan's daughter Grace slept curled into the corner chair. Her school jacket was draped over one shoulder, and her backpack was tucked beneath her feet. School had closed because of the snow, and the neighbor who sometimes helped in emergencies was out of town. Ryan covered Grace with a folded shop blanket without waking her. Neither he nor Lucas mentioned her again. The shop ran on quiet understandings shaped around Ryan's life, and on mornings like this, that was enough. The phone rang at 8:17. Margaret Holloway introduced herself without small talk. She was the founder of Morrison Capital Group, a private investment firm headquartered 3 miles north on Michigan Avenue, and she had a problem that had been growing for nearly 3 weeks. Her company owned 8 Bentley Bentegas under a comprehensive service agreement. The vehicles were used exclusively to transport senior clients and private partners to airports, meetings, and events that required reliability and a certain level of discretion. All 8 had been taken to Vance Prestige Auto Group during the same service visit in mid-November for routine scheduled maintenance. All 8 came back with clean paperwork. And all 8 began displaying critical fault codes within 14 days of returning to her fleet. That morning, she received the official service estimate. $200,000. $25,000 per vehicle. The dealership recommended replacing the central driver assistance control module in every car, followed by full system calibration and road verification. The estimate was professionally written, detailed, and presented with the quiet confidence of an institution that did not expect to be questioned. Margaret did question it. Something about the arithmetic stopped her hand before it reached the signature line. 8 vehicles. The same failure. The same timing. The same repair. The same price. All appearing after the same service visit. In her experience, coincidences that perfect were rarely coincidences. Ryan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked 2 questions. What were the exact fault codes? And had the cars been driven regularly in cold conditions after returning from service? Margaret read from the dealership's estimate. Each vehicle had 14 separate fault codes, all grouped under the Advanced Driver Assistance Systems. They involved the camera array, front and rear radar units, stability control processors, emergency braking systems, and related sensor modules. Ryan asked her to describe how the fault screen appeared when the warnings first came on. She said all the warnings appeared at once. All 14. As if someone had flipped one switch, not as if separate components had failed one after another. Ryan stayed silent longer than she expected from a mechanic receiving a serious business inquiry. Then he told her he would take the case. What he did not tell her was that the silence was the moment he recognized it. The failure he had documented 2 years earlier. The failure he had watched get buried before it could help anyone. Ryan had spent 4 years at Vance Prestige, first as a senior technician for European brands, then as the lead diagnostic specialist for Bentley, Porsche, and McLaren platforms at the dealership group's main location. In September 2022, while investigating 2 Bentley Bentegas in the shop with unusual driver assistance faults during cold starts, he had pulled a factory technical bulletin from Bentley Motors North America. The bulletin, labeled TSB 2023-441, identified a documented failure pattern in the Bentega's auxiliary power distribution system. The issue centered on fuse F47, a $14 thermal fuse located inside the secondary distribution box beneath the rear cargo floor panel. In cold climate use, the fuse could degrade in a way that was electrically invisible at room temperature but became obvious under sustained thermal load. Once the engine reached full operating temperature, the fuse's internal resistance would drift upward. That resistance caused a voltage drop across the shared power bus feeding the Advanced Driver Assistance System. It was not a catastrophic power loss. It was not enough to shut the system down completely. But it was enough to push every sensor and processor on that bus outside its required operating tolerance at the same time. The bulletin clearly recommended inspecting and replacing F47 before performing any module-level diagnostics or replacements on affected vehicles within the specified model year range. Ryan had compiled his findings from the 2 Bentegas in the shop. He documented the failure signatures with voltage logs and thermal data, attached the manufacturer bulletin, and submitted the full package to his service director with a written recommendation. Add F47 inspection to the cold climate service checklist for every affected Bentega variant. The service director's name was Jason Mercer. His reply came within 48 hours. Not applicable to current inventory. Do not escalate. 3 months later, Ryan Cole was fired from Vance Prestige Auto Group. His personnel file cited a lack of team cohesion. On the afternoon before his last day, Ryan printed both emails and placed them inside a manila folder at the back of his filing cabinet. He did not do it because he had a specific plan for them. He did it because some records need to be kept, even when nobody else seems interested in the truth. He had not opened that folder since. The 18 months between that filing cabinet and Margaret's call had been the kind of months that do not announce themselves as hard. They simply gather quietly in the gap between what a person expected and what actually happened. Ryan opened his shop with savings that were not quite enough and loans that were survivable only if he was careful. He built his customer base one referral at a time, doing the job correctly the first time and explaining it honestly even when honesty cost him money. He took whatever work came through the door because he could not afford not to. There were evenings when he sat at the same workbench after Grace fell asleep and wrote estimates for jobs that paid him $40 less than his labor was worth, because $40 short was still better than an empty lift. He did not talk about that with Lucas. He did not talk about it with anyone. The folder stayed in the cabinet. The emails stayed in the folder. And Ryan Cole spent a year and a half becoming very good at a business that required him to be right about things larger companies had found it more profitable to diagnose incorrectly. Margaret arranged for the first vehicle to arrive before noon. It came in on a flatbed, a silver Bentley Bentayga with 31,000 miles, a recently serviced engine bay, current maintenance stickers, and a body without a scratch. The moment Lucas turned the ignition on, the instrument cluster filled with 14 red warnings stacked across the display. Ryan connected the scan tool to the OBD port and allowed the system to complete a full read cycle before pulling the results. 14 active codes appeared on the screen, all in the same family of systems. Camera obstruction fault. Radar module not responding. Electronic stability intervention error. Autonomous emergency braking disabled. Lane departure warning offline. And 9 more entries that were all variations of the same core condition. Not a single code involved the engine management system, transmission, suspension hardware, brake hydraulics, or anything mechanical. The car itself was mechanically unremarkable. There was no sign of impact on the sensor housings. No visible condensation behind the camera glass. No physical damage anywhere. Nothing had failed in a way a person could see. Lucas pulled a stool over and studied the code list. He said a multi-system ADAS failure at that scale usually suggested a gateway module failure, a short on the communication bus, or serious water intrusion, any of which could cascade through the network. Ryan shook his head. Look at which systems are affected, he said. Every one of them is fed by the same auxiliary power distribution bus. This pattern isn't communication failure, and it isn't random component degradation. The modules are reporting correctly. They're telling us the power they're receiving is outside the tolerance they need to function. The parts aren't broken. The voltage feeding them is wrong. He took his multimeter and moved to the rear of the vehicle. He worked through the distribution panels in sequence, starting at the primary box under the hood, then moving to the auxiliary panel beneath the rear cargo floor. At 51 degrees Fahrenheit in the unheated bay, the compartment was cold but dry. Voltage at F47 measured 12.4 volts, stable and within specification. Ryan started the engine, let it idle, and attached a thermocouple probe to the fuse housing. He watched both displays as the engine cycled toward operating temperature. At 160 degrees Fahrenheit, voltage read 12.3 volts. At 175, it dropped to 12.1. At 182, it settled at 11.7 and stayed there, 0.3 of a volt below the lower edge of the specified range. Lucas looked over Ryan's shoulder at the meter. That's a tiny number, he said. On most cars, it would be irrelevant, Ryan answered. On this Bentley's driver assistance platform, it sits right on the edge of processor trust. The system required voltage within a specific band to maintain calibration confidence and signal integrity across every component on the shared bus. Once voltage dropped below that threshold, the central processor defaulted into a simultaneous failure state across all downstream sensors and modules. Not because the hardware had failed. Because the processor could no longer trust the power source delivering information to it. Every one of those 14 warnings was the system saying it no longer trusted its own inputs. Not because its eyes were broken, but because the current behind those eyes had become unstable. Ryan removed F-47 with a fuse puller and held it beneath the workbench light, slowly turning the plastic body between his fingers. The internal wire looked intact. The casing showed no discoloration, no warping, no visible sign of damage. That was the nature of this kind of thermal fuse degradation. It did not announce itself by burning open. It accumulated resistance over repeated heating cycles. It tested clean at ambient temperature and failed only when it mattered, under load, under heat, silently corrupting everything downstream. Ryan pulled an OEM spec replacement from his parts shelf. $14. He installed it in under 5 minutes. Then he cleared the stored codes, restarted the engine, and monitored the auxiliary bus voltage as the engine returned to full operating temperature. At 182 degrees Fahrenheit, the reading held steady at 12.4 volts. He connected the scan tool again. 0 active faults. 0 stored faults. Ryan took the Bentley on a 12-mile road test through neighborhood stop-and-go traffic, an arterial road, and a stretch of highway long enough to engage the adaptive systems at speed. He returned and scanned it again. Clean. Then he drove 11 miles in the opposite direction. Still clean. He recorded voltage readings at every stage. He saved scan tool outputs. He photographed the original fuse next to the replacement. He logged the ohm meter readings at each temperature interval. He noted ambient air temperature, fuse housing temperature, exact time elapsed between engine start and voltage drop, mileage, and traffic conditions during each test drive segment. The documentation was the kind that left little room for interpretation. The kind that answered future questions before anyone had the chance to ask them. Then Ryan called Margaret and told her exactly what he had found, exactly what he had repaired, and exactly what it cost. Carter Winslow, Morrison Capital's counsel, was on speaker in our office while Ryan explained. When Ryan finished, Winslow said what he needed to say. A certified Bentley facility with a full technical staff had examined the same vehicles and reached a conclusion requiring $200,000 in parts and labor. He wanted to understand how such a different result could be possible. Ryan said the question was fair. He also said he could not say with certainty whether the fault had been missed through carelessness or avoided intentionally. But he added that the difference between those two possibilities was exactly what Margaret should ask the dealership to explain in writing. Before 4 o'clock, Ryan emailed Margaret a 12-page diagnostic report. It included voltage logs, thermal readings, scan tool records, before and after comparison screens, test drive mileage documentation, photographs, and his written summary. He recommended that she forward the report to Vance Prestige with a formal written request, ask them to explain their diagnostic process, and specifically how they recommended a $25,000 module replacement on each vehicle when the root cause was a $14 fuse explicitly identified in a manufacturer bulletin. Margaret sent the report directly to Isabella Vance that same day. Her email was 2 sentences long and impossible to misread. Isabella received it at 3:47. She opened the attachment, read for about 90 seconds, then forwarded the file to Jason Mercer with one line. Handle this and report back to me by end of day. She had 17 other unread messages, a board presentation in 31 hours, and a shareholder call beginning in 20 minutes. She did not read page 3, where the voltage log was displayed. She did not read page 9, where Ryan Cole's name appeared in the diagnostic field. Jason Mercer read page 9 first. He recognized the diagnostic structure before he even reached the name. The voltage measurement sequence. The thermal profiling method. The specific framing of the failure as power source degradation rather than component failure. He had worked beside Ryan Cole for 4 years. Jason sat at his desk for 11 minutes without picking up the phone. Then he called Margaret Holloway. He spoke for 22 minutes. His voice stayed measured, professional, and patient throughout. He explained that replacing the fuse might have suppressed the visible fault codes, but the sustained voltage irregularity had already caused what he called latent degradation inside the module's solid-state components. The damage, he said, would not show up on standard short-term diagnostic scans but could produce unpredictable and potentially dangerous system failures over the coming months. He said the technician who had performed the work was not Bentley certified and had no authorization to access protected electronic systems. Allowing a non-certified third party to interact with the vehicle electronics, he said, technically voided the manufacturer warranty on that car. The remaining 7 vehicles had not yet been touched. He strongly recommended returning them to Vance Prestige immediately, because the combined remaining warranty exposure across those 7 vehicles was approximately $1.4 million. He would not be able to protect the warranty if a non-certified shop interacted with the systems. Carter Winslow called Ryan at 6:16 that evening. He said Morrison Capital was reconsidering its position. The warranty exposure was a number the company could not ignore without an independent opinion. Ryan asked for 48 hours. Winslow agreed, in the careful tone of a man granting a favor he was not sure he should grant. 40 minutes after that call, Isabella Vance called Cole Auto Repair directly. Ryan answered. She did not recognize his name. She had become CEO 14 months earlier, after her father's death. Ryan had left the company 18 months before that, so their employment at Vance Prestige had never overlapped. She informed him that his interference with Morrison Capital's vehicles constituted disruption of active service contracts, and that Vance Prestige's legal team was prepared to seek an injunction. Ryan told her she was free to take that route. Then he said he thought she should read the report carefully before instructing counsel to file anything. She said she had reviewed the material. Ryan said page 3 contained the voltage log identifying the exact failure mechanism. Page 9 contained the name of the person who had submitted a formal technical memo about that exact failure pattern to her service director in September 2022. He told her the same service director had reviewed that memo, marked it not applicable, and chosen not to escalate it. Those 2 pages are worth your time, Ryan said, before you make any further decisions. She ended the call without answering. The formal warranty notice arrived at Morrison Capital the next morning. It was 4 pages from Vance Prestige's legal department, citing service contract language, warranty codes, and a paragraph asserting that unauthorized electronic access by a non-certified technician constituted an irreversible warranty-voiding event under the extended service agreement. At the same time, Jason Mercer filed a compliance inquiry with the Illinois Regulatory Authority concerning Cole Auto Repair, listing 3 concerns related to manufacturer-specific electronic diagnostics and suggesting that a formal review was warranted. Carter Winslow called Ryan at 9. He said the board had fiduciary obligations, and $1.4 million in warranty exposure was not a sum any responsible company could dismiss based on a 14-page independent diagnostic report, no matter how convincing. Unless Ryan could provide documentation that resolved the liability issue, Morrison Capital would accept Vance Prestige's terms by Thursday morning. Ryan asked for 48 hours. Winslow said Thursday was the limit. Ryan spent the next hour sitting at his workbench without working. He was not a man who spent much time on the emotional side of problems. After Diana's death, and after Vance Prestige, he had learned to move through difficulty rather than around it. Keep your hands on the problem until the problem is solved. But this situation carried a different kind of weight. It was not merely professional. He had submitted the bulletin 18 months earlier. Mercer had buried it. And somewhere during those 18 months, An unknown number of vehicle owners had paid $25,000 for repairs they did not need. A company that should have known better had used its resources to manufacture the appearance that it had been right from the beginning. Ryan was not angry in the loud, urgent way anger usually works. What he felt was colder and more specific, the clear focus of a man who had watched an injustice remain uncorrected long enough to know exactly what would be required to correct it. He pulled the folder from the filing cabinet and got to work. The first thing he needed to establish was that Jason Mercer had known about the F-47 failure pattern before any Morrison Capital vehicle came in for service. Not that Mercer had missed the bulletin. That he had received it, reviewed it, and actively suppressed it. Ryan did not need to find anything new to prove that. The manila folder had been sitting in the filing cabinet for 18 months. At 10:45 that night, he opened it beneath the workbench light and reviewed both documents. The first was his email from September 14, 2022, with the bulletin attached. The subject line read, F-47 thermal failure pattern on 2022 Bentayga, urgent inspection recommended. The second was Jason's reply, dated 2 days later. Not applicable to current inventory. Do not escalate. Ryan photographed both pages, forwarded them to his personal email, and saved copies in 3 separate locations. The second issue was securing independent written confirmation that the module in the repaired vehicle remained undamaged, and that replacing the fuse according to the manufacturer bulletin did not qualify as an authorized modification under any applicable warranty language. Ryan called Daniel Whitfield, a senior engineer at Bentley Motors North America who had participated in the original bulletin's development. Whitfield confirmed both points during a 14-minute call and promised to send a signed letter within the hour. Meanwhile, Lucas spent the evening searching public records and identified 11 documented nationwide cases involving 2022 and 2023 Bentaygas with ADAS failures resolved by module replacement at authorized dealerships. 3 of those cases were at Vance Prestige. None of the 11 showed any record of F-47 inspection before the module was ordered. By midnight, Ryan had everything he needed arranged in a sequence that could not be dismantled by confidence, authority, or a 42-page technical presentation. Margaret Holloway arranged the meeting and made the terms clear. Both sides in the same room. Both sides presenting directly to her and Carter Winslow. No parallel legal channel controlling the discussion. Jason Mercer arrived at 11 with an attorney and a bound 42-page technical presentation, which he placed at the head of the table. He was cleanly dressed, composed, and completely comfortable in a conference room. Formal documentation, institutional weight, the dealership group behind him, this was familiar ground. Ryan Cole arrived alone. He set his laptop on the table, placed a soft envelope beside it, and put the removed F-47 fuse inside a small transparent evidence bag at the center of the table. He did not explain what it was. He did not introduce himself to Jason. Jason looked at the bag, then at Margaret, without acknowledging Ryan. Jason spoke first. His presentation covered the Bentayga's driver assistance architecture in the depth of someone who had prepared carefully. He reviewed voltage tolerance windows for each sensor category, known failure modes of solid-state modules exposed to unstable power supply, and the concept he called latent degradation, microscopic stress damage accumulating inside integrated circuits under voltage irregularity without producing immediately measurable faults. He cited 2 automotive engineering publications and concluded that Ryan's fuse replacement had removed the visible indicators while leaving the underlying damage untreated. His attorney remained silent throughout. But he was present in the way attorneys are present at such meetings, visible, available, and carrying the unspoken weight of what might follow if the conversation did not resolve. Ryan waited until the silence fully settled before moving. He lifted the transparent bag, placed it in the center of the table, looked at Jason Mercer, and asked one question. The module in the first repaired vehicle has been scanned 4 times across 340 miles of road testing at full operating temperature, and it has returned 0 fault codes every time. Is anyone in this room prepared to state in writing that the module is damaged? No one answered. Jason looked at the bag instead of Ryan. The attorney shifted slightly in his chair. Ryan opened his laptop and turned it toward the room. He presented 4 items. First, a 90-minute voltage log of the auxiliary power bus from cold start to full warm-up, showing degradation at the F47 housing temperature and full voltage restoration after replacement. Second, scan tool records, 14 fault codes before repair, followed immediately by a clean scan afterward, then clean outputs from 5 separate test drives. Third, written confirmation from Daniel Whitfield at Bentley Motors North America that the bulletin was an official manufacturer advisory and that fuse replacement performed in accordance with it did not constitute an authorized modification under applicable warranty language. Fourth, a 340-mile mileage log documenting vehicle operation across varying temperatures, with clean scan results attached at each interval. Jason let the pause stretch before responding. He said the bulletin was a discretionary advisory, not a mandatory protocol. He said the technical staff at Vance Prestige had reviewed its applicability and determined it fell outside the parameters of the vehicles in question. He delivered the statement with the practiced authority of a man who had spent years managing technical objections for a living. Then Ryan opened a soft envelope. He placed 2 printed pages on the table. The first was Ryan's email to Jason Mercer dated September 14, 2022, with the bulletin attached. The subject line was visible. F47 thermal failure pattern on 2022 Bentayga, urgent inspection recommended. The second was Jason's reply dated September 16. Not applicable to current inventory. Do not escalate. The 2 pages lay flat beneath the fluorescent conference room lights. For nearly 6 seconds, no one spoke. Isabella Vance sat at the far end of the table with a legal pad she had not written on for the last 40 minutes. She looked at the emails. Then she looked at Jason. The expression on her face was not anger. It was stillness, the stillness of someone performing a fast and unwanted recalculation, measuring what she thought she knew against evidence that no longer allowed the earlier version to survive. She had not known those emails existed. She had inherited an organization and trusted the people already managing its pieces. 2 sheets of paper now defined the size of that trust with a precision she could not argue against. Jason's attorney raised the issue of confidentiality. Ryan was no longer employed by Vance Prestige, he said, and internal correspondence was company property. Ryan said he had printed both documents while employed there, as the author of one of them, and kept them in his own files. The attorney said the company reserved all rights. The meeting ended without a formal resolution. Carter Winslow escorted Jason and the attorney to the elevator. When the doors closed, 3 people remained in the room. Isabella gathered her legal pad and unopened folder, then left without speaking to either of the 2 remaining people. At 11:40 that night, she sat in our office while the building around her stood quiet. She was reviewing Morrison Capital's fleet service records through the general manager level portal, a system she rarely used directly because the service division reported to her through Jason's summaries. She read the raw data for the first time. The pattern Ryan described was visible in the records. All 8 vehicles had entered service within the same 4-day intake window. All 8 had been returned within 48 hours. All 8 had generated fault codes during the following 2 weeks, gradually, as thermal cycles accumulated through the fuse housing, exactly as the bulletin predicted. But one record stopped her cold. Jason Mercer had submitted a purchase order for Bentley Bentayga ADAS control modules dated November 1. The vehicles did not arrive for service until November 14. He had ordered the replacement modules 13 days before any of the 8 cars had been inspected, diagnosed, or authorized for repair. A purchase request of that value required a vehicle identification number and documented diagnostic justification. The entry showed only the fleet account number and a category label, projected service recommendation. That classification was intended for routine consumables, not $25,000 electronic assemblies requiring individual justification for a specific vehicle. Isabella opened the Technical Bulletin database. TSB 2023-441 was filed under Bentayga service category, marked, not applicable, with the initials JM and the date September 12, 2022. She pulled the modification history. The bulletin had been received from Bentley Motors North America on September 8, 2022, 6 days before Ryan Cole had emailed it to Jason. That meant Jason had received the official manufacturer distribution version, reviewed it, marked it not applicable, and initialed its suppression before Ryan's internal submission ever arrived. He had not failed to act on Ryan's report. He had acted on the original document first. She sat with that fact in the empty office for a long time. The next morning at 7:15, Isabella drove to Cole Auto Repair without calling ahead. The lights were already on inside. Ryan was under the rear of a truck when she entered through the side door. He rolled out when he heard her, looked up at her from the floor for a moment, then stood without surprise or ceremony. She asked to see the repaired vehicle. Ryan washed his hands in the utility sink and led her to the back lot. The Bentayga sat beneath a single light pole in the cold morning air. He started the engine and connected the scan tool with a cable from his shirt pocket. They stood together while the system initialized. Neither of them spoke. The screen returned blank. 0 active codes. 0 stored codes. Isabella looked at the display longer than the reading required. She asked how many years he had worked at Vance Prestige. 4, Ryan said. She asked why he left. I was fired in May 2023. She asked what reason the record gave. Lack of team cohesion. She did not answer. She looked at the empty diagnostic screen one more time, then walked back to her car. The board meeting took place at 2 that afternoon. Isabella presented the November 1st module purchase order, dated 2 weeks before the vehicles were received. She presented the bulletin record, dated and signed off by the service director before the model had seen its first Chicago winter. She presented the NHTSA complaint data Lucas had gathered, showing the same fault presentation at authorized dealerships across the country, including 3 cases at Vance Prestige specifically, all without documented F47 inspection before module-level work. She did not editorialize. She placed the documents in chronological order and let the sequence speak. The board authorized an internal investigation and suspended Jason Mercer pending its outcome by unanimous vote. He was escorted from the building at 4:17 that afternoon. His access credentials were deactivated before he reached the exit. The investigation that followed lasted 11 weeks and covered nearly 3 years of service records. It identified 4 to 7 cases of module-level replacement billed at full price on vehicles where fuse-level or relay-level intervention was available but not documented as considered. The findings were forwarded to Bentley Motors North America's Warranty Compliance Division and to the Illinois Consumer Protection Bureau. Isabella called Ryan at 6 that evening. He was still at the shop. I owe you an apology for 3 things, she said. First, I threatened you with legal action before reading your documentation properly, and that was wrong. Second, I allowed the structure of my own company to stop me from seeing what I should have seen before this week. Third, and I want to be clear that this has nothing to do with any legal resolution, I now understand that what happened to you in May 2023 was unfair. I understand that completely. I cannot change it, but I want you to know I see it now. Ryan said he appreciated her saying it. A pause opened on the line. He did not fill it. Neither did she. Sometimes 3 honest sentences, offered plainly, are exactly the right length for what needs to be said. Vance Prestige repaired all 8 Morrison Capital vehicles the following week. Each one received a new F-47 fuse, installed and verified at full operating temperature before the vehicle was cleared. Not one module was replaced. The total parts cost across the fleet was $112. Morrison Capital was not billed. The repairs were completed at Vance Prestige's expense under a written agreement acknowledging diagnostic error and releasing all outstanding warranty claims. Margaret Holloway accepted the keys on Thursday afternoon and asked for nothing beyond what had been agreed. In the weeks that followed, Isabella restructured the service department. Any repair estimate exceeding $5,000 on a warranted vehicle now required independent review by a second technician not connected to the original diagnosis. Every manufacturer technical bulletin, whether labeled discretionary or advisory, became a mandatory checkpoint. A written explanation was required before any bulletin could be marked not applicable. The service director position was posted externally. The operational changes took effect without announcement and without ceremony, which was, in its own way, a statement. The 4 to 7 cases uncovered in the internal investigation were more than compliance issues. Each one represented a vehicle owner who had paid for a repair they did not need, based on a diagnosis guided not by the condition of the vehicle but by the existence of a parts order already placed. Bentley Motors North America's warranty division opened a formal review that expanded to 4 other authorized dealership groups in the region. 2 of those groups later identified similar patterns inside their own historical service records. The Consumer Protection Bureau's findings were not published in detail, but the reimbursement process that followed cost Vance Prestige far more than the original $200,000 estimate that had started everything. 2 weeks after the case closed, Margaret Holloway called Ryan and offered Cole Auto Repair a fleet maintenance contract for Morrison Capital. 12 vehicles. 1 year. Option to renew. The value of the agreement was enough for Ryan to add a second lift by February and bring on a full-time technician by spring. Lucas Reed signed his full-time offer the same day Ryan signed the fleet contract. Neither of them made a ceremony of it beyond the necessary paperwork. The shop changed in gradual, practical ways over the next month. A second diagnostic station took its place along the left wall. The waiting area received a proper coffee machine. A framed printout of the Morrison complaint summary sat on the shelf above Ryan's workbench, unlabeled, unexplained, simply there. Some documents remain close to a person not because they need to be consulted every day, but because they represent something the person chose not to surrender when surrender would have been easier. On the last Friday of November, the sky over Halstead Street was pale and still, the kind of day that settles without weather after weeks of heaviness and asks nothing from the people moving through it. Ryan was at his desk finishing an invoice for a brake job when the side door opened and Grace came in, dragging her backpack by one strap. In her other hand, she held a folded drawing. She placed it on the edge of his desk, then made no further mention of it. She crossed to her chair in the waiting area and opened her homework folder with the calm of a child who had spent enough time in a workplace to understand its rhythm. Ryan unfolded the drawing beneath the workbench light. It showed a building with 2 windows, 2 bay doors, and a sign above the entrance written in careful, uneven letters. He folded it back along its original creases and placed it on the shelf above the Morrison printout. Then he returned to the invoice in front of him and finished it. The top line of the receipt for Morrison's first repaired vehicle read $14. And somehow, that number meant everything. He signed it and filed it with the others. Some people are removed from rooms because they ask questions the room has already decided are inconvenient. And sometimes the answers to those questions sit quietly inside distribution boxes, manila folders, and $14 fuses with a hairline drift in resistance that no one can see until someone chooses to look. They wait with the precise patience of things that are simply true, whether or not anyone decides to acknowledge them. The dealer said the problem cost $200,000. The real problem cost 14. The distance between those two numbers was not a diagnostic failure. It was a decision, made in ordinary daylight by someone who correctly calculated that most people would never ask. The weakness in that kind of calculation is simple. It only works until one person does.